Leadership does not start the moment someone decides to follow you. It starts the moment you stop being a prisoner of your own mind. Before anyone listens to a single word you say, they feel your state. Before anyone trusts your direction, they sense whether or not you are in control. And before you ever lead another human being, you are already leading something far more brutal. Your thoughts, your emotions, your impulses, your standards. This is the part of leadership nobody wants to talk about. Not the speeches, not the titles, not the authority handed to you from the outside, but the quiet, invisible, relentless work of commanding yourself. Because here is a truth that rarely gets spoken out loud. You can have intelligence and still not be a leader. You can have confidence and still not be a leader. You can even have power and still not be a leader. But you cannot lead anyone consistently, calmly, or sustainably if you cannot first lead yourself. Every single breakdown in leadership traces back to one place, the inside. Not a bad decision, but a lost moment of control. A reaction instead of a response. An emotion that ran wild. A standard that quietly got abandoned. A moment where comfort won over discipline. And once that happens, authority begins to bleed out. People may not say a word. They may not confront you directly, but they feel it. Leadership is not what you claim to be. It is what your presence communicates when your mouth is completely shut. This audiobook is not about managing other people. It is not about motivation. It is not about charisma, influence, tactics, or how to sound impressive in a room. This is about something far more fundamental. Self-leadership. Because self-leadership is the root system beneath all real authority. When the roots are weak, no amount of external success can hold the structure upright. When the roots are strong, even your silence carries weight. Over the next 60 minutes, we are going to strip leadership down to its bare bones. Not what looks polished on the outside, but what actually holds when the pressure comes for you. And the pressure always comes. You will learn how leadership is forged through self-control. How emotional discipline quietly creates unshakable authority. How standards, not moods, define who leads and who merely reacts. And why clarity inside the mind always arrives before confidence shows up in the world. You will not be asked to hype yourself up. You will not be told to believe harder or manufacture motivation from thin air. Instead, you will be challenged to develop command. Command over your reactions. Command over your inner dialogue. Command over what you tolerate, what you allow, and what patterns you keep repeating. Because leadership is not a performance you put on. It is a state you maintain. And that state is built privately, long before it is ever witnessed publicly. Throughout this audiobook, we will move through 8 core principles of self-leadership. Each one is simple. None of them are easy. Each one strips away noise, excuses, and emotional clutter. And each one moves you closer to the kind of leadership that never needs to announce itself. You will learn why self-control is the first form of leadership, why mastering your emotions matters infinitely more than expressing them, why discipline will always outlast motivation, why standards, not titles, are what actually generate authority, why clarity sharpens confidence from the inside out, why real leaders live in the pause that separates stimulus from response, why consistency builds trust, beginning with the trust you have in yourself, and finally, how becoming the person you genuinely respect on the inside is what makes others follow you on the outside. This is not about becoming louder. It is about becoming steadier. It is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about removing the desperate need to prove things at all. Because the strongest leaders are not the most reactive people in the room. They are the most regulated. They do not scramble to speak. They do not scramble to defend themselves. They do not scramble to explain every move they make. They move with intention. They act from standards, and they lead internally first, always. As you listen, resist the urge to rush through it. Let the ideas settle into you. Notice exactly where resistance rises up inside you. That resistance is not your enemy. It is information. If something lands uncomfortably, that discomfort is not a problem to solve. It is a signal that growth is standing right at your door. By the end of this audiobook, no one will hand you a title. No one will grant you authority. But you will have something worth far more than either of those things. A framework for leading yourself when absolutely nobody is watching. A way to stay grounded when the pressure mounts. And a standard you can return to again and again, every single time the world gets deafeningly loud. Because before you lead a team, before you lead a family, before you lead a business or a vision that matters to you, you must first lead yourself. And that is precisely where we begin. Chapter 1. Self-control is the first form of leadership. Leadership does not begin with vision. It does not begin with confidence. And it absolutely does not begin with influence. Leadership begins with self-control. Before anyone follows your direction, they feel your discipline. Before anyone trusts your decisions, they sense your stability. And before your words carry any real weight, your behavior has already delivered its verdict. Self-control is the foundation that every other thing rests on. Without it, intelligence becomes reckless. Confidence becomes arrogance. Ambition becomes chaos. With it, even the quietest actions feel authoritative. Self-control is not about suppressing who you are. It is about governing who you become in every moment that actually matters. Because every leadership failure begins the exact same way, with a moment of unchecked impulse, a reaction instead of a response, a tone that slips out sideways, a decision fired off too fast, a boundary that bends just this once. And in that precise moment, something subtle but devastating happens. You lose command, not over others, over yourself. Leadership does not collapse in a loud, dramatic crash. It erodes quietly. Self-control is what stops that erosion cold. It is the ability to pause when emotion surges inside you, to hold your position when pressure shoves you, to stay steady when the situation is practically begging you to unravel. This is why self-control is the first form of leadership, not because it looks impressive to outsiders, but because without it, nothing you build will last. Think carefully about the leaders you respect most, not the loud ones, not the theatrical ones, but the ones who stay composed when everything around them catches fire. They do not rush. They do not flinch. They do not feel compelled to over-explain themselves. Their calm is not accidental. It is trained. And that calm sends a signal more powerful than any speech ever delivered. Self-control creates presence. Presence creates trust. Trust creates followership. Without self-control, your authority is a house of cards. With it, your authority becomes a fortress, even when the circumstances surrounding it are anything but stable. Here is the part most people completely misunderstand. Self-control is not about running away from emotion. You will still feel anger rise in your chest. You will still feel pressure closing in. You will still experience frustration and doubt crawling through you. Leadership does not ask for emotional numbness. It demands emotional command. And there is a world of difference between those two things. Emotion is information. Impulse is a reaction. Self-control is the space between the two. And in that space, leadership lives and breathes. When you act the instant emotion hits, you hand your power away. When you pause, even for a breath, you take it back. That pause does not need to be dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it is a single, slow breath. Sometimes it is choosing silence instead of explanation. Sometimes it is deciding not to respond at all. But every single time you choose restraint over release, you reinforce authority inside yourself first and foremost. This is why leaders who have no self-control feel utterly exhausting to be around. They drain energy instead of generating stability. They react instead of deciding. They move people emotionally, but never directionally. Self-control transforms that entirely. It turns volatility into reliability, noise into clarity, reaction into intention. And intention is the dividing line between leadership and pure impulse. Self-control also determines how seriously the world takes you. People watch what you tolerate with great attention. They track what triggers you. They observe how quickly you can be pulled off your center. Not consciously, instinctively, because leadership is never evaluated through pure logic. It is felt in the gut. If you are easily rattled, people feel it. If you are emotionally predictable, people feel safe. If you are grounded, people will trust your direction even before you open your mouth to give it. This is not about dominance. It is about regulation. A leader who cannot regulate themselves forces everyone around them to compensate and regulate around them instead. A leader who can regulate themselves creates breathing room for everyone else to actually perform. This is why self-control is not passive or inactive. It is active leadership in its most demanding form. Now comes the uncomfortable part. Self-control reveals exactly who is actually running your life. If your mood is making your decisions, your mood is your leader. If pressure is deciding your tone, pressure is leading you. If other people's behavior is controlling your reactions, those people are leading you. Real leadership begins the moment that stops. When you decide that your internal state is not a negotiating table. When you choose your standards over your impulses every single time. When you refuse to let emotion sit in the driver's seat. This does not make you cold or robotic. It makes you reliable, and reliability is one of the most underrated leadership qualities that exists. People follow those they can count on, not those who feel intensely, but those who respond with intention. So how do you actually begin building self-control? You start small, but you start deliberately, and you start now. You practice pausing before you react. You practice finishing what you started even when every cell in your body has stopped wanting to. You practice keeping your tone steady, especially when emotion is screaming to raise it. You practice saying less when everything inside you wants to say more. Every single one of these moments is a leadership rep, not visible to anyone around you, not celebrated by anyone watching, but more powerful than almost anything else you could do. Self-control is built exactly the same way physical strength is built, through repetition, through resistance, through consistently choosing the harder response over the easier reaction. And the moment you stop leaning on impulse, something inside you shifts in a way you will feel immediately. Your mind grows quieter, your presence deepens, your decisions sharpen. You stop needing to prove yourself to anyone. You stop needing to explain your every move. You stop rushing because you are no longer reacting to the moment. You are leading it. This is the first threshold of real leadership. Before vision, before influence, before any responsibility for other human beings. Self-control. If you cannot govern yourself, nothing else holds. If you can, everything else becomes possible. And that discovery opens the door to the next layer. Because once self-control is established, the deeper challenge becomes learning what to do with the emotions that still rise up relentlessly. Not by burying them, not by unleashing them without thought, but by mastering them. And that is where real authority begins to take its final shape. Chapter 2. Master your emotions before they decide for you. Emotions are extraordinarily powerful, but power without direction is one of the most dangerous forces on earth. Leadership does not require you to eliminate emotion from your experience. It requires you to stop letting emotion make critical decisions on your behalf. Every single day, emotions rise automatically without warning. Anger, frustration, anxiety, excitement, doubt. They arrive before logic does, before reason, before intention has a chance to catch up. If you follow them blindly, they will decide your tone, your timing, and your actions without your permission. And once that happens, leadership is no longer in your hands at all. This is why emotional mastery is not optional for leaders. It is as essential as oxygen. Uncontrolled emotion creates inconsistency, and inconsistency annihilates trust faster than almost anything else. People can work under strict leaders. They can adapt to demanding leaders. They can even find a way to operate under difficult leaders. But they cannot function under unpredictable ones. When emotions run the show, behavior becomes wildly unstable. Calm one day, explosive the next. Reasonable one moment, completely impulsive the next. And people begin walking on eggshells everywhere they go. That is not leadership. That is your emotional chaos being handed to everyone around you as their burden to carry. Real leadership begins the moment emotions are felt, but not blindly obeyed. There is a profound difference between feeling anger and acting from it, between noticing fear taking root inside you and surrendering fully to it, between experiencing crushing pressure and becoming it entirely. Emotion is a signal, not a command. The real problem is not emotion itself. The real problem is identification. When you say, "I am angry," you fuse completely with the emotion. It becomes you. When you instead say anger is present right now, you step back and reclaim distance. That distance is power. Because the moment you create space between yourself and what you are feeling, choice returns to you. And choice is the very core of leadership. Leaders do not react faster than everyone else. They react later, after clarity has replaced the initial impulse. This is precisely where emotional mastery actually lives. Not in suppression, not in theatrical expression, but in regulation. Regulation means you allow the emotion to exist without allowing it to dictate your behavior. You do not deny it. You do not dramatize it. You observe it from a distance. And observation changes everything about what happens next. When you observe an emotion, it loses its authority over you. When you obey it, it gains total control. This is why calm leaders radiate genuine power. Not because they are empty of emotion, but because they are not owned by it. Their calm is not passivity dressed up to look composed. It is command. Calm under pressure communicates something deeply powerful without uttering a single syllable. I am not overwhelmed by this. I am not being rushed. I am not threatened here. and people respond to that energy on an instinctive level they cannot fully explain. Emotional mastery also determines the amount of damage you cause or prevent during the moments that define everything. A single emotional outburst can undo months of earned credibility in under a minute. One uncontrolled reaction can fracture trust that took years to build and may never fully return. One impulsive decision can create consequences that outlive the moment that caused them by years. Leaders understand this at a cellular level. They know that the highest leverage moments in any situation demand the absolute lowest emotional volatility. This is why silence is so often the most powerful response available. Silence allows the emotion time to burn itself out. It gives clarity the time it needs to rise to the surface. It prevents the regret that comes from saying the unretrievable thing. You do not surrender authority by pausing in silence. You gain it, because that pause signals something unmistakable. It signals control. When pressure spikes and emotions surge, most people feel a desperate urgency to act immediately, to say something, to fix something, to defend themselves without delay. Leaders resist that urge with everything they have. They slow down when everyone around them is accelerating. They lower their voice when others are raising theirs. They choose restraint when others choose explosive release. And that contrast is felt immediately in every room it occurs in. Emotional mastery also begins deep inside you, long before anyone else is involved. It starts with mapping your own patterns honestly. What consistently triggers you? What pulls you reliably off your center? Where do you predictably lose your objectivity? These patterns are not character flaws or permanent weaknesses. They are data, and data allows you to prepare instead of react in real time. When you know your emotional patterns intimately, you stop being blindsided by them. And when you are not blindsided, you are not controlled. Preparation is one of the quiet, unspoken advantages of strong leadership. You do not sit and wait to feel calm. You deliberately build systems that generate calm. You structure your days with intention. You protect your sleep without negotiation. You limit unnecessary stimulation in your environment. You reduce decision fatigue wherever you can find it. These are not simple productivity habits. They are emotional regulation strategies at their deepest level, because a nervous system that is chronically dysregulated cannot lead effectively, no matter how intelligent or talented the person inside it is. This is why emotional mastery is not purely mental. It is physiological. Your body influences your reactions long before your conscious mind has any say in the matter. Leaders who ignore this reality burn out, snap, or spiral the moment serious pressure shows up. Leaders who respect it remain steady when everything around them is shaking. Emotional mastery also demands that you choose your battles with ruthless selectivity. Not every emotion you feel deserves expression. Not every irritation that flares up deserves even one moment of your attention. Not every provocation that comes at you requires a response. Discernment is emotional intelligence applied to the real world. When you respond to everything, you dilute your authority until it becomes meaningless. When you respond selectively and deliberately, your responses carry extraordinary weight. People begin to notice this over time. They learn that when you speak, it actually matters. They learn that your reactions are measured and purposeful, not automatic and reflexive. And over time, that predictability creates genuine safety in the people around you. Safety creates trust. Trust creates influence. This is why mastering your emotions is not about exercising control for its own sake. It is about shouldering your full responsibility as a leader. Because your emotional state affects far more than just you. It sets the tone for every room you enter. It shapes the entire environment around you. It directly impacts the performance of everyone in it. When you regulate yourself, you regulate the space. And that, in its most essential form, is leadership. So, the practice remains simple but brutally demanding. Notice the emotion without obeying it. Pause before responding. Lower the intensity before making any decisions. Choose clarity over release every time you have the choice. Each time you do this, you reinforce authority inside yourself before anyone else can see it. And gradually, something fundamental changes in you. You feel less reactive, more grounded, more deliberate in everything you do. You stop being battered by internal storms. And when the internal world stabilizes, the external world follows. Because leadership is not about eliminating emotion. It is about mastering it completely. And once emotion is no longer holding the steering wheel, discipline can finally take its rightful place. That is the next layer. And it is where leadership becomes consistent regardless of your mood, your energy level, or whatever circumstances the day decides to throw at you. Chapter 3. Discipline is stronger than motivation. Discipline is not dramatic. It does not make grand announcements about itself. It does not care at all about how you felt when you woke up that morning. And that is precisely why it works when everything else fails. Motivation is emotional energy. It rises and crashes with the tide. It responds to comfort, excitement, and external validation like a plant responds to sunlight. Discipline is something entirely different. Discipline is structure. It is commitment that does not open the door to negotiation. Leadership cannot be built on something that evaporates the instant real pressure appears. And pressure always appears without exception. This is why discipline outlasts motivation every single time without question. Motivation feels intoxicating in the beginning. It generates momentum. It creates excitement. It creates the compelling illusion of permanent change. But motivation is reactive by its very nature. It needs the conditions to feel right before it will show up. Discipline does not wait for conditions. Discipline performs when conditions are completely wrong. When your energy is at its lowest. When your confidence has gone silent. When nobody in the world is watching or measuring what you do. That is the exact territory where leadership is actually forged. A disciplined leader does not ask themselves whether they feel like it today. They ask what needs to be done, and then they do it. Not perfectly, not heroically, but consistently. Consistency is what separates genuine discipline from momentary intensity. Intensity is impressive for a brief and shining moment. Consistency is what becomes impressive as the years pass. Leadership is not proven in explosive bursts of effort. It is proven in patterns that repeat when the excitement has long since faded. This is why disciplined leaders feel deeply reliable to everyone around them. You know what to expect from them. You know they will show up. You know they will follow through on what they committed to. Not because they possess some superhuman capability, but because they do not require emotion to take action. Discipline also builds something people rarely talk about enough: internal trust. When you repeatedly do what you told yourself you would do, something quiet but transformative shifts in you. You begin to genuinely trust yourself. That self-trust is understated, but its power is staggering. It eliminates hesitation. It reduces internal conflict. It stabilizes the decision-making process at its roots. A leader who genuinely trusts themselves does not guess every single move they make. They move forward with clarity even when outcomes cannot be guaranteed. Without discipline, self-trust erodes at the foundation. You begin making promises to yourself that you consistently break. You begin negotiating with your own standards when discomfort rises. You begin explaining and rationalizing instead of simply executing. And slowly confidence becomes a performance you put on, rather than something genuinely grounded in your actions. Discipline reverses all of that. It replaces internal noise with internal order. And internal order is the soil in which true leadership grows. This is why discipline is not a cage. It is the key to genuine freedom. When your actions are governed by discipline, you stop bleeding energy on internal debates about whether to act. You stop bargaining with discomfort like it deserves a seat at the table. You stop needing constant external reassurance that you are on the right path. You simply act. And action is what creates the clarity that everyone is always searching for. Many people operate under the belief that clarity must arrive first, and action follows from it. In reality, disciplined action is what generates clarity. You do not sit and wait until you feel fully ready. You move, and readiness catches up to you in motion. This is one of the hardest truths for most people to fully accept, because discipline demands that you do things before you want to do them, before confidence arrives, before inspiration shows up. But leadership demands precisely that capability without apology. A leader cannot hold a position at the mercy of ideal emotional weather. Decisions still need to be made. Standards still need to be upheld. Direction still needs to be given. Discipline ensures that leadership does not go dark during emotional droughts. It also sets the tone for everyone within your orbit. When people see that you operate from non-negotiable standards rather than shifting moods, something fundamental shifts in how they relate to you. They stop trying to manage your emotional state. They stop guessing where you actually stand on things. They start aligning with your consistency because it gives them something solid to push against and build from. This reduces friction dramatically. It builds trust. It creates psychological safety at depth. People perform better under disciplined leadership, not because it is gentler, but because it is predictable. And predictability creates stability. Stability allows focus. And focus is where real results are born. Discipline also sharpens judgment in ways that are difficult to overstate. When you lack discipline, you tend to overreact to things. You compensate for gaps. You swing between extremes looking for balance. When you are disciplined, your responses become proportional. You conserve your energy intelligently. Your decisions become cleaner and faster. This happens because discipline trains patience over time. And patience is not the passive act of sitting still. It is the fierce ability to hold your ground without forcing outcomes that are not ready to emerge. Leaders without patience rush critical decisions. They seek relief over resolution. They confuse urgent feelings with genuinely important needs. Discipline slows all of that down. It teaches you to act with deliberate intention, to choose timing over raw speed, to value alignment over the appearance of decisive action. This discipline becomes especially critical under pressure. Pressure does not create your habits. It simply exposes the ones you already have. When everything is bearing down on you, you do not rise to meet your potential. You fall to your current level of discipline. This is why disciplined leaders remain effective in the middle of chaos. They are not improvising on the spot. They are executing patterns they trained into themselves long before the chaos arrived. Those patterns may look deceptively simple from the outside, but simplicity is always the end result of deep refinement. Discipline removes everything excess, unnecessary reactions, unnecessary words, unnecessary movement. What remains after all of that is precision. And precision is its own form of authority that cannot be faked. People instinctively trust leaders who move with precision, who speak with deliberate intention, who act without wasted motion or wasted energy. Discipline also demands that you have real, non-negotiable boundaries. You cannot sustain discipline if everything about your standards is negotiable under pressure. You cannot lead from a position of strength if your non-negotiables flex the moment discomfort arrives. Discipline means deciding in advance what you will not compromise under any circumstances. Your schedule, your commitments, your principles. When those lines are drawn clearly and honored consistently, decisions become dramatically easier to make. You stop asking yourself, should I? You ask yourself, does this align? Alignment replaces internal debate. This is how leaders conserve their precious mental energy. They reduce the number of choices they face by raising their standards until those choices are already made. And that conservation matters enormously. Leadership is extraordinarily demanding. If you burn your energy on indecision and inconsistency, you will have nothing left for what genuinely matters. Discipline protects your energy by directing it, rather than allowing it to scatter in all directions. And over time, discipline reshapes your identity at its deepest level. You stop seeing yourself as someone who attempts things. You start seeing yourself as someone who does things. That identity shift carries more power than any motivational speech ever given, because identity drives behavior more reliably than intention ever will. Once discipline becomes who you are rather than something you practice, leadership becomes natural rather than effortful. Not forced, not performative, not exhausting, just steady. This does not mean discipline becomes painless. It means it becomes worth every ounce of effort it costs. There will be days when discipline feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. When resistance is screaming inside you. When every shortcut in the world looks irresistible. Those moments are not signs that you are failing. They are moments of leadership training in its purest form. Each time you choose discipline over the comfort that is calling to you, you reinforce authority inside yourself first. And that internal authority always expresses itself externally. Because people can feel when your actions are truly anchored, when your direction is genuinely stable, when your leadership is not subject to the weather of your mood. Discipline makes that possible. It is the invisible architecture holding everything together beneath the surface. And once discipline is fully in place, leadership acquires something critical that it has been building toward all along. Standards, not abstract values hanging on a wall, but lived rules that guide decisions when emotions surge. Rules that shape behavior reliably when nobody is watching. That is where leadership becomes impossible to miss. And that is exactly where we go next. Chapter 4. Standards create authority, not titles. Authority does not come from what you are called. It comes from what you consistently refuse to compromise. Titles can be assigned to anyone on any given day. Positions can be handed out. But authority is earned through something that cannot be given. It is earned through standards. Standards are the rules you live by when no one is enforcing them. They are the lines you refuse to cross, even when crossing them would be dramatically easier. They are the expectations you place on yourself long before you think to place them on anyone else. Without standards, leadership becomes hollow at its center. You can give direction, but it will not carry weight. You can make decisions, but they will not inspire real confidence. You can occupy a role, but you will not command genuine respect. Because people do not follow words. They follow consistency. And standards are what generate that consistency. A leader operating with weak standards sends mixed signals at every turn. One day, something matters deeply. The next day, the same thing is apparently irrelevant. One moment, discipline is the expectation. The next moment, it is quietly excused. That inconsistency erodes trust faster than any visible mistake possibly could. People do not need perfection from their leaders, but they absolutely need predictability. Standards make behavior predictable. They communicate clearly what you will tolerate and what you will not. They define what is acceptable and what falls outside the line. They eliminate ambiguity, and ambiguity is the silent enemy of all real authority. When standards are unclear, people test the boundaries, not out of malice, but out of genuine uncertainty. They are trying to locate where the line actually is. If the line keeps moving, authority weakens every time it does. This is why standards must be internal before they can ever be external. You cannot expect discipline from other people if you constantly excuse it in yourself. You cannot demand focus from others if you sit surrounded by distraction. You cannot enforce accountability if you perpetually renegotiate your own commitments under the slightest pressure. Leadership begins with standards you impose on yourself without being asked. What time you wake up without excuses. How you speak when the pressure is at its highest. What you finish even when every trace of motivation has abandoned you. What behaviors you absolutely refuse to justify no matter how compelling the story sounds. These details appear small in isolation, but leadership is constructed from small repeated signals stacked on top of each other over time. Every time you hold your standard, you send a message, first to yourself, then inevitably to everyone watching. That message is direct and powerful. This matters. And when enough things matter consistently and without apology, authority forms like bedrock. Authority is not loud. It does not need constant explanation. It is felt. People recognize when a leader has standards because there is alignment visible in everything they do. Words match behavior. Decisions match values. Expectations match actions without exception. This alignment creates a kind of confidence that does not need to be emotional to be powerful. It is structural confidence, the kind that holds its shape under stress when everything else is bending. Standards also protect leaders from the trap of emotional decision making. When standards are clear, you stop deciding in the heat of the moment. You follow what you have already decided in a calmer place and time. This removes an enormous weight. Instead of asking yourself, "What should I do right now?" you ask, what is the standard here? That single shift changes everything about how quickly and cleanly you move. Standards simplify leadership. They reduce complexity. They reduce the negotiation that drains you. They reduce the internal conflict that clouds judgment. And they dramatically reduce the likelihood of decisions you will later regret. Many of the most painful leadership failures in history happened not because people lacked intelligence or awareness, but because they abandoned their standards the moment real pressure arrived. Pressure reveals standards. It does not create them. If your standards dissolve when circumstances get difficult, they were never standards. They were preferences. Preferences are negotiable. Standards are not. This distinction is not semantic. It is everything. Leaders who operate on preferences feel unstable to everyone around them. Leaders who operate on genuine standards feel grounded in a way that nothing can easily shake. Grounded leaders create trust. Trust allows people to relax their defenses. And when people relax, they perform at levels they are genuinely capable of. Standards also shape the culture around you, whether you intend them to or not. People mirror what you allow with remarkable precision. If you allow chronic lateness, you are teaching chronic lateness. If you accept excuse making as a normal response, you are normalizing excuse making. If you permit inconsistency in yourself or others, you are making inconsistency the standard. Culture is not what you announce in meetings or post on walls. Culture is precisely what you tolerate in practice. This is why strong leaders are sometimes misread by those who do not understand what they are witnessing. From the outside, they can appear strict, reserved, uncompromising in ways that seem unnecessary. But what they are actually doing is protecting clarity for everyone. They are removing confusion from the environment. They are eliminating friction before it metastasizes. They are creating a space where expectations are clear enough that people can finally focus on performing their best. Clarity in leadership is not coldness. It is an act of profound generosity. Unclear standards force everyone around you to guess. Clear standards set people free to focus their energy where it actually belongs. Standards also demand a kind of courage that most people underestimate. It is always easier to bend a rule in the moment than to hold it firm. It is always easier to sidestep discomfort than to uphold consistency when the cost feels personal. It is always easier to explain away a boundary than to maintain it when someone pushes back hard. But every time you bend a standard to avoid tension in the short term, you pay for it with authority in the long term. Short-term comfort purchased at the cost of long-term stability is never a leadership bargain worth making. Leaders with strong standards accept short-term discomfort to protect long-term trust. They are willing to be misunderstood briefly rather than be ineffective permanently. This is not rigidity born of ego. This is responsibility taken seriously. Standards should be unwavering, but never arbitrary. They need to be rooted in genuine purpose, not in the need to control or protect a personal image. Standards exist to support performance, integrity, and the direction everyone is trying to move in together. When standards serve those ends clearly, people respect them even when they initially resist. And over time, resistance fades into alignment. Because consistency teaches better than any speech ever could. People adapt to what does not change. This is exactly why leaders who constantly bend to please others progressively lose the authority they are trying to protect. They teach everyone around them that consistent pressure is ultimately rewarded with compromise. Leaders who hold their standards teach an entirely different lesson. They teach reliability. They teach fairness. They teach that expectations are applied equally, and that equal application is something worth trusting. Nothing undermines authority faster than double standards that everyone can see. When rules apply to certain people and not others, trust collapses. When exceptions become routine, credibility disappears entirely. Strong leaders are not harder on other people than they are on themselves. They are harder on themselves than anyone. They hold themselves to the same standard or a higher one. This creates moral authority. And moral authority is more durable than any positional authority that can be removed with a single organizational decision. People may comply with a title out of obligation, but they follow genuine integrity by choice. Standards are the visible expression of that integrity. They demonstrate that you live by something that extends beyond personal convenience. And that demonstration is the true source of lasting followership. Standards also stabilize your identity in ways that reduce the exhausting need for constant recalibration. When your standards are clear, you do not reinvent yourself from day to day based on approval or mood. You know who you are in practice. That stability reduces anxiety. It quiets the overthinking. It removes the desperate need for external validation on every decision. You stop asking, "Was that okay?" and start asking, "Did that align?" Alignment replaces insecurity as your operating principle. This internal alignment is what makes leadership sustainable across years and decades, rather than burning out in months. Without it, leadership becomes exhausting maintenance work. With it, leadership becomes cleaner and more natural. Standards carry the weight. They guide behavior when emotions spike. They anchor decisions when clarity momentarily fades. They protect authority when pressure reaches its peak intensity. And over time, they define you completely, not by what you say, but by what you refuse to compromise under any circumstances. That is why authority is not delivered by a title or a position. It is constructed through standards. And once standards are genuinely in place, leadership gains something that transforms everything else: clarity. because standards without clarity can still feel rigid and confusing to everyone trying to follow them. But clarity transforms standards into direction. And direction is what allows leadership to move forward with genuine confidence, real purpose, and deep calm. That is exactly where we go next. Chapter 5. Clarity comes before confidence. Confidence is widely misunderstood. Most people believe you need to feel confident first, and then act from that feeling as your foundation. But in leadership, confidence is almost never an emotion you feel in advance. It is a byproduct of something else entirely, and the source of that byproduct is clarity. When your mind is genuinely clear, your actions become steady. When your actions are steady over time, confidence follows naturally and without force. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence that needs an audience to survive, but quiet certainty that does not need to justify itself to anyone. Clarity is knowing what matters right now and what simply does not. It is understanding your direction without needing constant reassurance that you are still pointed the right way. It is the ability to move forward without explaining every single step to everyone watching. Leaders who lack clarity often try to compensate for it with intensity. They speak more than necessary. They move faster than the situation requires. They project certainty they do not actually feel underneath the performance. But intensity cannot replace clarity, no matter how convincing the performance gets. And over time, the people around them begin to sense the difference between the two. Unclear leaders feel restless and unpredictable to everyone around them. They overthink everything. They hesitate at critical moments. They change direction more frequently than circumstances actually require, not because they lack capability, but because their internal world is too noisy to hear what is actually being called for. Noise is the quiet killer of confidence. When the mind is crowded with competing priorities and unresolved questions, decisions feel heavier than they need to be. Every available option competes loudly for attention. Every possible outcome feels equally risky. This creates either paralysis or impulsive action, designed purely to escape the discomfort of uncertainty. Neither one of those is leadership. Clarity removes that weight completely. When you are clear, decisions simplify, not because they become easier in any objective sense, but because they become aligned with what you have already committed to. Alignment removes friction. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is the next aligned action?" That question alone transforms the decision-making experience entirely. Clarity also stabilizes communication in ways that cannot be imitated. A clear leader speaks with precision. They do not ramble through tangents. They do not over-explain every decision until everyone in the room is confused. They do not hedge every statement with so many qualifications that the original meaning dissolves. They say exactly what needs to be said, and then they stop. This brevity is not arrogance. It is confidence that has been rooted in genuine understanding. People trust clarity with a loyalty that is almost instinctive. When instructions are clear, people feel secure enough to execute them well. When expectations are clear, people perform at a higher level. When direction is clear, people commit with their full energy rather than holding back to protect themselves from sudden changes. Unclear direction does not create motivation problems. It creates anxiety, and anxiety dressed up as a motivation problem gets treated with the wrong remedies. But the issue was never motivation. It was always clarity waiting to be provided. Clarity also fundamentally changes how you handle uncertainty. Leadership was never about having all the answers to every question in advance. It is about knowing which questions actually matter enough to pursue. A clear leader does not manufacture certainty where none honestly exists. They acknowledge what is genuinely unknown without allowing that acknowledgement to cost them their direction. This balance is one of the most critical in all of leadership. Pretending certainty you do not have creates a fragility that shatters spectacularly under pressure. Acknowledging uncertainty while maintaining clear direction creates the kind of trust that survives pressure intact. People do not expect their leaders to be all-knowing. They expect them to be grounded. Grounded leaders know their priorities with clarity. They know their values without needing to consult a document. They know their non-negotiables so well that they could defend them in the middle of the night, half-asleep. And when those things are clear, uncertainty cannot destabilize them no matter how loud it gets. Clarity also prevents emotions from hijacking your decisions in vulnerable moments. When you are unclear about what matters, emotions rush in to fill the vacuum. Fear inflates risks until they appear unsurmountable. Doubt magnifies obstacles until they block the entire horizon. Other people's opinions gain far more influence than they have earned. Clarity acts as a filter against all of this. It allows you to genuinely hear input without being capsized by it, to consider feedback without surrendering your direction to it, to adapt your approach without losing your identity in the process. This is one of the most valuable leadership capacities that exists. Clear leaders are flexible without being unstable. They can adjust their tactics without abandoning their principles. They can listen without losing their conviction. That balance is genuinely rare, and it comes entirely from having clarity as the foundation beneath everything. Clarity is not a destination you reach once and never have to tend to again. It is a discipline you practice consistently. You must regularly clear away the mental clutter that accumulates, unnecessary commitments that drain your energy, conflicting priorities that pull you in incompatible directions, unexamined beliefs that were never really yours to begin with. Mental clutter creates hesitation. Hesitation erodes confidence until confidence becomes a memory. This is exactly why leaders who try to pursue everything simultaneously end up leading nothing effectively. Focus is the direct function of clarity. When everything is declared equally important, nothing actually is. Clear leaders are deliberately selective. They choose fewer priorities and commit to them with depth. This selectivity is not a limitation on their potential. It is the leverage that multiplies it. By saying no with genuine conviction more often, they ensure that every yes they give carries real weight behind it. Clarity also sharpens self-trust at the deepest level. When you understand genuinely why you are doing something important, resistance loses its grip on you. When you know your direction with conviction, external doubt loses its power over your decisions. You stop requiring validation from others before you move. You stop needing constant confirmation that you are still on the right path. That independence is what real confidence looks and feels like, not emotional bravado that needs an audience to sustain it, but internal alignment between your values and your actions, between your intentions and your actual daily behavior, between the long-term vision you are building toward and the specific decisions you make today. When that alignment is present and consistent, confidence feels calm rather than forced. You are not trying to convince anyone of anything. You are simply moving forward with clarity as your guide. Clarity also reveals honestly where your discipline has gaps. Confusion frequently hides avoidance if you are willing to look at it honestly. If you feel persistently unclear about something that genuinely matters, ask yourself one question. Is this a lack of information or a lack of committed decision making? Many people pursue clarity as a strategy for delaying action indefinitely. They want perfect certainty before they are willing to move. But real leaders understand that clarity most often arrives after commitment, not before it. You move. You observe carefully what happens. You adjust based on what you learn. Action refines clarity with a precision that waiting never will. This does not mean acting without thought or recklessly ignoring available information. It means acting deliberately with the best information currently in your hands. Perfection is not clarity. Perfection is avoidance wearing the disguise of precision. Clear leaders accept incomplete information without being paralyzed by its incompleteness. They make their best decision available to them, and they take full responsibility for whatever outcome follows. Responsibility strengthens confidence. Avoidance guarantees that it will erode. Clarity also strengthens your boundaries in ways that make everything else easier. When you are genuinely clear about your priorities, distractions become immediately obvious for what they are. When you are clear about your standards, compromises become visible the moment they present themselves. You no longer negotiate with every demand that arrives at your door. That conservation of energy is critical for sustained leadership. Leaders who burn out lose their clarity first. Then their patience follows. Then their discipline collapses entirely. Clear leaders protect their energy by protecting their focus with the same intensity they bring to everything else. They do not overconsume information that does not serve their direction. They do not engage in unnecessary conflicts that drain without producing anything useful. They do not react to every signal the environment throws at them. They choose with great deliberateness what genuinely deserves their attention. That choice, repeated daily, is clarity in its most active and powerful form. Clarity also fundamentally changes how other people experience being around you. People feel genuinely secure around leaders who have clarity. They know exactly where they stand. They know precisely what is expected of them. This reduces the background tension that quietly destroys performance in unclear environments. Unclear leaders create anxiety not through malice or incompetence, but simply because ambiguity is one of the most psychologically stressful conditions human beings regularly face. Clear leaders remove that ambient stress. They create environments where people can direct their full energy toward execution rather than burning it on guessing games. That is leadership operating at the scale of an entire environment, rather than just individual interactions. Clarity also deepens resilience in a way few things can match. When challenges arrive, and they absolutely will, clarity reminds you precisely why you are pressing forward. Without clarity, obstacles feel deeply personal. With it, obstacles feel procedural. You stop asking yourself, "Why is this happening to me?" in a helpless voice. You start asking, "How do we move through this?" with the voice of someone who fully expects to come out the other side. That shift is one of the most powerful transformations leadership can produce. It turns problems into processes that can be analyzed and improved. Emotional reactions, by contrast, cannot be improved because they are not structural. Clarity moves leadership out of the purely emotional realm and into the structural one. And structure is where genuine consistency lives and grows. Confidence that is rooted in clarity does not fluctuate with your mood or the weather outside. It does not inflate on days of praise or collapse under criticism. It remains steady, not because the leader feels fearless in some superhuman way, but because they know with conviction what they are doing and exactly why they are doing it. This is the kind of confidence that other people genuinely trust. Not loud, not aggressive, not perpetually defensive, just grounded in something real. And once clarity is established as the foundation, leadership gains the capacity to pause naturally and without strain. Because when clarity is present, you are no longer rushing to prove anything to anyone. You are responding from understanding rather than reacting from pressure. That pause is more powerful than most people realize. It is what separates leaders from reactors in the moments that define everything. And the space between stimulus and response is exactly where the next layer of leadership is built, because clarity prepares you to stop reacting, and reaction is the final obstacle leadership must permanently outgrow. Chapter 6. Stop reacting. Start responding. Reaction is automatic. Response is intentional. That single difference between automatic and intentional separates those who merely manage moments from those who genuinely lead them. Reaction is fast, emotional, and driven by habit, fear, ego, or artificial urgency. Response takes a breath longer, but in that additional breath, leadership is born. Most of the damage inflicted in leadership does not come from bad intentions or failures of intelligence. It comes from fast reactions fired off under the heat of pressure. A sharp reply that lands like a blade, a defensive tone that shuts the room down, a rushed decision that unravels at the worst possible moment, a premature conclusion drawn before the facts are fully in hand. None of these emerge from clarity. They emerge from reactivity. And leadership requires something far rarer than reactivity: the genuine ability to pause. That pause is not weakness wearing a quiet mask. It is not passive hesitation dressed up as patience. It is control in its most active and demanding form. When you pause, you interrupt the automatic cycle that would otherwise run without your permission. You prevent emotion from converting directly into behavior before you have authorized the transaction. And that interruption consistently changes the outcomes that follow. Reacting feels productive in the moment because it releases tension that has been building inside you. Responding feels uncomfortable precisely because it demands restraint instead of release. But relief is not leadership. Direction is. And leaders choose direction over relief every single time they face that choice. Reaction seeks to discharge emotion as quickly as possible. Response seeks to actually resolve the situation at its source. This is why reacting so reliably creates more problems than it solves. It escalates conflict instead of reducing it. It spreads tension instead of containing it. It creates consequences that persist long after the original trigger has been forgotten. Responding does the exact opposite. It lowers the intensity of any situation it enters. It clarifies intent where there was confusion. It keeps authority intact when it would otherwise be visibly compromised. This difference is felt immediately by every person present. People can sense when a leader is in reaction mode. There is urgency in the air, defensiveness, excess, and scattered energy. They can also sense, with equal precision, when a leader is genuinely responding. There is calm present, deliberation, grounded presence that makes the room feel manageable instead of chaotic. That presence alters the entire environment around it. It signals stability at a level that registers before any words are spoken. And stability is one of the most powerful forms of leadership that exists. Leaders who react quickly often genuinely believe they are demonstrating decisive leadership. But decisiveness without clarity is simply speed. And speed is not leadership. Timing is. Responding allows timing to become a conscious tool rather than an accident. It creates space to consider impact before acting, to weigh consequences before committing to a direction, to choose words deliberately instead of simply releasing them into the world unchecked. Words released in pure reaction are extraordinarily difficult to retrieve. Actions taken in pure reaction can be impossible to undo. Leaders understand this with a clarity that shapes every high-stakes interaction. They know that one genuinely controlled response can prevent weeks of difficult repair work from being necessary. This is why restraint is not passivity in leadership. It is prevention at the highest level. Responding also preserves the dignity of everyone involved in a situation. When you react, you get pulled into the emotional field of the moment and lose altitude rapidly. You fight on the same reactive level as whoever triggered you. When you respond, you stay above it without abandoning the situation. You do not deny the emotion that is present. You simply refuse to be dragged downward by it. And that refusal communicates something that force and volume never could. It communicates strength. People consistently follow those who remain composed when tension spikes around them, because composure under real pressure signals something profound. It signals capacity. If you can manage yourself when the pressure is at its highest, people trust instinctively that you can manage the situation itself. This becomes especially important in moments of genuine disagreement. Disagreement is inevitable in any meaningful leadership context. Conflict is unavoidable, but escalation is always optional. Reactive leaders escalate situations without even meaning to. They take disagreement personally. They defend their ego when it feels threatened. They interpret every challenge as an attack that requires immediate defense. Responsive leaders listen first, not because they have already decided to agree, but because they understand that genuine comprehension must come before any real resolution can occur. Listening slows a situation down to a pace where clarity can operate. It removes the dangerous assumptions that make everything worse. It creates space inside which better decisions can actually emerge. Responding also protects your focus from being stolen by minor provocations. Reaction scatters your attention in all directions simultaneously. It pulls you into side battles that were never worth fighting in the first place. It drains your energy on issues that do not deserve it. Response conserves energy. It keeps your attention anchored to what genuinely matters in the situation. Leaders who spend their days reacting to everything eventually become completely exhausted. They are perpetually putting out fires, always treating symptoms while causes go unaddressed. Leaders who respond strategically move toward causes. They ask, what is actually happening underneath this? What truly matters most right now? What outcome am I genuinely trying to create here? These questions cannot be accessed in reaction mode. They require the pause that only discipline can create. And this is exactly where all the earlier principles begin working together as a unified system. Self-control makes the pause physiologically possible. Emotional mastery keeps the intensity manageable enough to think. Discipline prevents the impulsive action that would compromise everything. Standards guide behavior when emotion wants to override them. Clarity directs what response actually serves the situation. Without these foundations already in place, responding feels genuinely impossible to sustain under real pressure. With them, it becomes the natural way you move through the world. Responding also transforms how you personally experience pressure over time. Pressure feels overwhelming when you believe you must act this very instant, or something important will be irreversibly lost. When everything feels equally urgent, nothing is actually being prioritized. Response introduces hierarchy into your perception. It allows you to distinguish between what is urgent and what is genuinely important, between noise demanding attention and signal deserving it, between the emotional experience of a moment and the actual reality of the situation. This distinction is one of the most critical skills in all of leadership. Leaders who react treat almost everything as a crisis that requires immediate mobilization. Leaders who respond know with experience that most things are not crises. They conserve genuine urgency for the moments that truly call for it. That conservation builds credibility over time. When you finally do act with decisive urgency, people pay complete attention because they know that you are not in reaction mode. They know your actions are considered and purposeful. Responding also consistently improves the quality of your communication in measurable ways. Reactive communication tends to be excessive. Too many words fighting for space. Too much self-justification. Too much after the fact explanation of why you said what you said. Response is economical by design. You say only what is genuinely necessary. Words are chosen rather than leaked. Space is left for other people to actually process what you have said. This economy of language creates authority that excessive words cannot generate. People trust leaders who speak with clear intention. They sense that the words you use were chosen deliberately rather than leaking out as emotional pressure sought an exit. Responding also includes the recognition that not every situation even requires a response. Silence is sometimes the most powerful and intelligent response available. Not avoidance, not emotional suppression. Strategic silence, chosen deliberately. Silence gives emotions the time they need to settle without causing additional damage. It prevents escalation from occurring in the first place. It creates the space for genuine reflection to happen. Leaders who are genuinely comfortable with silence are almost never reactive. They do not rush to fill empty space with words. They do not rush to defend their position the instant it is questioned. They do not rush to control how other people perceive them in every moment. They understand at depth that presence communicates more than immediate verbal response ever can. This comfort with silence is rooted in internal stability. If you are internally unsettled, silence feels threatening and dangerous. If you are internally grounded, silence feels completely neutral and even useful. Responding also strengthens your boundaries in ways that shift the fundamental dynamic of every interaction you have. When you react to everything that comes at you, you allow external forces to set the tempo of your experience. They provoke. You respond instantly. They have led you. When you respond with intention, you reclaim control of the tempo. You decide when to engage and how deeply to invest in the interaction. This shift is subtle, but it is one of the most powerful leadership movements you can make. It moves leadership back into your own hands where it belongs. You are no longer being orchestrated by external stimuli. You are leading your engagement with them deliberately. Responding also builds long-term trust in a way that reactive behavior never can. People may disagree with specific decisions you make. They may not always love the outcomes that result, but they deeply respect consistency. They respect fairness. They respect the restraint that produces both of those things. These qualities live in responsive leadership, not reactive leadership. Over time, people learn that emotional pressure does not move you, that manufactured urgency does not rush you into poor decisions, that provocation does not place itself in control of your behavior, and that learning changes their behavior around you in fundamental ways. They communicate with greater care. They escalate less frequently and with better cause. They prepare more thoroughly before engaging with you, because your response pattern has trained the environment itself. Leadership is not only about how you personally act. It is also about what your consistent actions train other people to expect from their interactions with you. Reaction trains chaos in the system. Response trains order. Order enables genuine efficiency. Efficiency produces results that justify the whole endeavor. Responding also reshapes your internal experience in ways that compound beautifully over time. You feel less emotionally drained by individual interactions, less regretful about words that cannot be taken back, less reactive to the inevitable provocations that show up daily. You begin to experience pressure without being consumed by it from the inside out. This internal calm becomes self-reinforcing as it grows. You become harder to destabilize with each passing challenge, more centered through difficulty, more deliberate in everything you touch. And that internal state eventually becomes your leadership signature. Not aggression, not volume, not theatrical displays of decisiveness, but composure. and composure under sustained pressure is genuinely rare. And rarity is the foundation of influence that lasts. This is why responding is not a technique to be applied situationally. It is an identity to be grown and inhabited. You become someone who responds naturally, someone who chooses timing as an instrument of precision, someone who values genuine resolution over the temporary relief of emotional release, someone who leads moments rather than being carried away by them. And once you stop reacting as a default mode, something critically important becomes accessible that was always waiting for you. Consistency. Because reactions change with every shift in your mood, but responses follow the standards you have built. And consistency is the bridge between leadership and the trust that makes it all worthwhile. That bridge is what we cross next. Chapter 7. Consistency builds trust in yourself first. Trust is not constructed through moments of brilliant intensity. It is built through repetition that accumulates over time into something unshakable. People do not extend trust based on what you say or do once in an impressive moment. They extend it based on what they have watched you do again and again across all the moments that did not feel impressive at all. This is why consistency is among the most powerful forces in leadership, and among the most persistently underestimated. A leader can be extraordinarily talented and still be untrusted, deeply charismatic and still fundamentally unreliable, genuinely visionary and still destabilizing to everyone trying to work with them. Because talent without consistency creates uncertainty, and uncertainty, quietly and persistently, erodes the trust that makes everything else possible. Consistency is the specific force that transforms raw potential into earned credibility over time. When your actions align with each other across time, people gradually stop questioning your direction with suspicion. They stop bracing for unexpected changes that force them to recalculate everything. They stop allocating mental energy to prepare for unpredictability. They genuinely relax. And when people relax their internal vigilance, they can focus their full capacity on actual performance. Focus is precisely where the results that matter most are produced. Consistency begins in the most private place imaginable. Before other people can trust you, you must first build trust in yourself. Self-trust is not a feeling that arrives spontaneously when you need it. It is an outcome that is painstakingly earned by keeping the promises you make to yourself when no one is there to see whether you keep them or not. By following through when there is no external accountability enforcing it. By behaving the same when you are completely alone as you do when every eye is on you. When you break commitments you made to yourself, something structural weakens inside you, even if nothing visible shows on the surface. You begin hesitating more frequently before decisions. You second guess what you already know. You find yourself looking outward for reassurance that should be coming from within. Inconsistency generates internal noise, and that internal noise inevitably expresses itself externally in ways that others can feel, even when they cannot name exactly what they are sensing. A leader who does not trust themselves compensates in ways that are unmistakable to close observers. They over-explain decisions that should not require justification. They seek approval they have not earned and do not actually need. They shift direction more frequently than circumstances genuinely call for, not because they are incapable of clear thinking, but because their internal foundation has not been built solid enough to stand on with full confidence. Consistency stabilizes that foundation at its core. Every time you follow through on what you committed to, you reinforce a specific identity. You become concretely and demonstrably someone who does what they say they will do. That identity is extraordinarily powerful in practice. It reduces the friction that delays action. It simplifies decisions that would otherwise require extensive internal debate. It strengthens your resolve when resistance shows up to test you. Consistency also removes the exhausting dependency on emotional states that plagues so many otherwise capable leaders. When you act from consistency rather than mood, you stop requiring motivation to get moving. You move because it is simply who you are now. This frees you from behavior that rises and falls with the emotional weather. Mood is fundamentally unpredictable, day by day and hour by hour. Identity, forged through repeated consistent action, is not. Leaders who operate from clearly established identity feel steady even when the circumstances around them are entirely unstable. That steadiness has a contagious quality. People around you begin to mirror the consistency they experience from you. When leadership is erratic, people become defensive and protective of themselves. They hedge every commitment. They hold back full investment because experience has taught them the ground might shift without warning. When leadership is consistent, people align with it naturally. They know what to expect at depth. They know where the boundaries are. They know how decisions will be made before the decision arrives. This predictability is not the enemy of energy or excitement. It is the ground that makes genuine creativity and risk-taking possible. Grounded environments consistently produce better results than volatile ones. Consistency also creates fairness in a way that nothing else can fully replicate. When the same rules are applied to everyone without favoritism, trust deepens measurably. When expectations are genuinely stable across time, resentment decreases and collaboration increases. Nothing destroys the morale of a group faster than inconsistency applied selectively. One person held accountable while another is quietly excused. One standard enforced today and a contradictory one applied tomorrow. This breeds a specific kind of cynicism that is extraordinarily difficult to undo once it takes root. Consistent leaders avoid this trap with vigilance. They apply standards regardless of personal convenience, regardless of individual preference, regardless of the social pressure to make an exception just this once. This does not make leadership rigid. It makes it a form of integrity that people can actually feel. Integrity is consistency between your stated values and your actual behavior. People extend deep respect to integrity, even when they disagree with specific decisions made from it, because they sense coherence in everything they observe. Consistency also protects leaders from the burnout that slowly destroys sustained effectiveness. The constant adjustment demanded by inconsistency is genuinely exhausting work. Perpetual reinvention drains the energy that should be going into actual leadership. When you are consistent, you perform dramatically less emotional labor on a daily basis. You are not perpetually recalibrating your position on fundamental questions. You are not renegotiating with every new situation as though your values are still undecided. You operate from a stable center that conserves energy for the decisions that genuinely require it. That energy conservation is critical for the long game of leadership. Leaders who burn out become reactive. Reactive leaders become inconsistent. Inconsistency breaks the cycle of trust before it can compound. Consistency interrupts that destructive cycle before it takes hold. It keeps leadership sustainable across the years and decades that distinguish real impact from brief, impressive performances. Consistency also sharpens judgment in a way that accumulates with interest over time. When behavior follows patterns, deviations from those patterns become immediately visible and meaningful. You notice with greater precision when something genuinely warrants your focused attention. Without consistency as a baseline, everything feels equally urgent all the time. With it, signal separates from noise with a clarity that improves every decision you make. This reduces the pull toward short-term fixes that create long-term problems. You commit to long-term direction rather than chasing whatever screams loudest in the moment. That commitment generates momentum. Momentum, built on consistent action, is quiet but compounding. It does not spike dramatically and then crash. It accumulates over time into something that feels almost inevitable to those watching from the outside. Small, consistent actions repeated with discipline create impact that occasional bursts of intensity can never match. This is true at the deepest internal level and at every external level simultaneously. Internally, consistency builds self-respect that compounds on itself. Externally, it builds credibility that opens doors which intensity alone could never unlock. A leader who has lost self-respect eventually loses the external respect of others. A leader who has built genuine self-respect radiates confidence without needing to perform it for anyone. Consistency also trains discipline in a direction that builds on itself over time. Each time you repeat aligned behavior, the resistance you feel weakens noticeably. What initially required real effort to sustain begins to feel automatic. This automation frees cognitive and emotional bandwidth for the genuinely complex challenges that advanced leadership demands. You no longer expend energy debating whether to uphold basic standards today. You no longer question foundational actions that should be non-negotiable. They are simply how you operate, as natural as breathing. This allows you to direct your full focus to the higher-order challenges where experienced leadership is most needed. Strategy, vision, direction for the future. Without consistency handling the fundamentals, leaders get permanently trapped managing basics that should have been resolved long ago. Consistency is what elevates leadership capacity from managing the present to shaping the future. It also reduces emotional volatility in ways that directly support every other leadership quality you are building. When your actions are predictable and aligned, the emotional turbulence of regret and reactive cleanup decreases substantially. You encounter fewer self-inflicted consequences from impulsive decisions. Fewer relationships require repair. Fewer situations demand damage control. You experience pressure without being consumed by it. This emotional stability reinforces and strengthens every principle that came before it. Self-control becomes easier to maintain. Emotional mastery becomes more natural with less effort. Discipline becomes identity rather than effortful practice. Standards hold their shape under pressure. Clarity stays intact when it is needed most. Responses continue to replace reactions even in the most difficult moments. Consistency is the thread that runs through every layer of effective leadership. Without it, all the principles you have built remain theoretical possibilities. With it, they become the way you actually live and lead. Consistency also profoundly changes how others choose to engage with you over time. People invest more care in preparing for interactions. They communicate with greater precision and accountability. They respect the boundaries you have established because they know through experience that inconsistency will not eventually rescue them from having to meet the standard. This accountability across every relationship improves performance systemically. It also dramatically improves the quality of the relationships themselves. Consistent leaders are easier to trust and work alongside, even when their standards are demanding. People consistently value fairness more than comfort when they have to choose, and consistency, applied with genuine integrity, is the most reliable source of fairness that a leader can provide. Consistency also builds influence that endures well beyond the moment it is exercised. Influence built purely on charisma eventually fades when the charisma is not being actively performed. Influence built on demonstrated consistency endures because it is rooted in something real. Charisma may attract initial attention with considerable power. Consistency is what holds that attention and converts it into genuine trust over years. This is exactly why the quietest leaders often have the deepest and most lasting impact on the people around them. They are not impressive in individual moments. They are deeply reliable across the entire span of time people have known them. Time is the ultimate revealer of leadership. Consistency is what passes that test when everything more superficial has burned away. There is also a deeper layer to all of this. Consistency aligns you with the fundamental reality of how sustained results are created in any domain. Reality reliably rewards what is repeated with discipline, not what is attempted with great excitement once or twice. Leadership is entirely subject to the same principle. What you do occasionally cannot define you in any meaningful sense. What you do consistently, over and over, across years that accumulate into a life, is what you actually are. This truth can feel uncomfortable when you first genuinely sit with it. But it is liberating in a way that almost nothing else is. It means leadership is genuinely accessible to anyone willing to do the ordinary things consistently and without giving up. It is not reserved for people who are gifted with rare bursts of brilliance. It is available to anyone who handles ordinary moments in the same way again and again until the accumulated weight of those moments becomes unmistakable. Consistency returns full power to the daily choices that feel small in the moment, but turn out to be everything over time. Small choices, repeated choices, often unnoticed choices. Those choices build trust, first in yourself, then, inevitably, in everyone who has been watching closely enough to notice. And once trust is genuinely established at that depth, leadership no longer requires active enforcement or constant reinforcement. People follow because trust has removed the friction that was previously standing between their potential and its full expression. Consistency removes friction from every system it enters. It smooths movement through obstacles. It stabilizes direction under pressure. It deepens influence with every repetition that compounds on all the ones before it. And once consistency is genuinely in place as the foundation of how you operate, leadership acquires the final quality that everything has been building toward. Presence, not presence that is performed or forced or manufactured through clever technique, but presence that emerges naturally from the alignment between who you are, what you do, and the standards you refuse to abandon. That presence is unmistakable to every person who encounters it. And it leads us to the final chapter. Because when consistency has become your identity, leadership no longer requires noise to be heard. It moves quietly, with focus, with restraint, with a strength that does not need to announce itself. And that is where true leadership is fully and finally formed. Chapter 8. Become the person others want to follow. Leadership reaches its highest expression when it no longer needs to convince anyone of anything. no persuasion, no pressure, no carefully calibrated performance designed to generate compliance. People follow because of who you are in the deepest and most consistent sense, not because of what you demand from them in a given moment. This is the threshold where leadership stops being something you do strategically and becomes something you embody entirely. At this level, influence is not forced into existence. It is felt without effort. Presence replaces persuasion as the primary operating mechanism. People sense it before you speak a single word. They notice it in how you move into a room, in the quality of attention you give when someone is speaking, in how you remain centered when everyone around you is in various stages of panic. This presence is not charisma, which can be learned and performed by anyone with enough practice. It is something rarer. It is coherence. The coherence between what you think and what you do, between the values you claim and the behavior others observe, between the words you speak and the silences you choose. When these elements align completely and consistently, leadership becomes as natural as breathing. People are instinctively drawn to stability. In a world saturated with noise, artificial urgency, and emotional volatility that has become the default setting for most people, calm authority stands out immediately and powerfully, not because it demands attention loudly, but precisely because it does not need to demand anything. It simply is. This is why genuine leaders rarely feel compelled to over-explain their decisions. Excessive explanation most often signals insecurity searching for validation. Presence signals certainty that has been earned through demonstrated consistency. The more deeply grounded you are in your own internal clarity, the less urgency you feel to justify yourself to anyone external. People trust leaders who have arrived at that place. They may not always agree with every decision, but they feel genuinely safe following a direction set by someone with that kind of coherence. Because safety in leadership does not come from comfort or easy reassurance. It comes from predictability, visible integrity, and demonstrated restraint. Becoming the person others naturally want to follow does not require perfection in any form. It requires congruence above everything else. You do not need to have every answer before you lead. You need to remain steady while you search honestly for them. You do not need to be fearless in the face of uncertainty. You need to remain regulated in the presence of fear, so that others can see it is survivable. You do not need to dominate every room you enter. You need to remain centered when your position is challenged and your identity feels threatened. This centeredness is magnetic in the most genuine sense of that word. It signals the kind of maturity that only comes from sustained self-work. Immature leadership seeks control over everything it touches. Mature leadership holds space for what is actually there. Holding space means you do not collapse under the weight of emotion, your own or the emotion that others bring to you. It means you can hear genuine disagreement without personalizing it as an attack. It means you can maintain clear direction without becoming rigid in the ways that make adaptation impossible. This balance between clarity and flexibility, firmness and genuine openness, is extraordinarily rare, and rarity is the engine of the influence that actually endures over time. People follow those who make difficult situations feel manageable rather than impossible, who reduce chaos rather than unconsciously amplifying it, who simplify what has become needlessly complicated. This is exactly why calm leaders are so consistently underestimated early on. They do not posture for advantage. They do not create urgency to demonstrate their relevance. They do not assert dominance to establish their position. But as time passes, their steadiness becomes something that cannot be dismissed. When the pressure comes, and it always comes, they remain composed while others fracture. When conflict arrives, they do not add heat to the fire. When uncertainty spreads through the environment like a contagion, they ground the room in something real. And people remember exactly who did that. They remember who held their center when everything else lost its footing. That memory creates loyalty of a kind that no performance or persuasion campaign can manufacture. Leadership built this way does not depend on your current position to function. It survives the removal of title because it was never really housed in the title. It survives transitions in environment and role because it is not tied to a specific context. It is tied entirely to character. And character is the ultimate leadership asset, without exception or competition. It is what remains fully intact when every external form of authority has been stripped away. Character is revealed in how you treat the people who can do absolutely nothing for you, in how you conduct yourself when you are certain no one important is observing, in how you behave when dishonesty would be completely invisible and honesty has a real cost. These moments define leadership far more profoundly and permanently than any public win or celebrated success. People may genuinely admire success, but they follow character. This is why leaders who invest primarily in managing their image progressively lose the influence they are working so hard to protect. Image is high maintenance and fragile. It requires constant work to maintain and constant anxiety that it might crack. Character compounds quietly and without the need for active management. It grows stronger through the challenges that would destroy anything less solid. Becoming the person others want to follow also requires letting go of the need to control outcomes directly. Control produces compliance, but compliance is the most fragile form of followership that exists. It breaks the instant the pressure increases beyond a threshold, or the supervision becomes imperfect. Genuine influence produces alignment, and alignment endures because it is chosen freely by people who trust both the direction and the person setting it. Aligned people move in the same direction because they have chosen to, not because they have been forced to by circumstances they cannot escape. That choice lives in trust, and trust is earned through consistency, restraint, and fairness applied without favoritism. All of the earlier chapters built the specific foundation required for this final expression. Self-control gave you genuine command over your own internal state. Emotional mastery stabilized your inner world until it became a reliable place to live and lead from. Discipline removed the dependency on mood that keeps most leaders trapped. Standards created visible integrity that others could measure their trust against. Clarity provided direction that others could follow with confidence. Response replaced reaction as your default mode of engagement. Consistency built trust, beginning with the foundational trust you carry in yourself. This chapter is the natural result of all of that accumulated inner work. You no longer try to lead as an activity you perform. You simply lead through how you move through the world each day. Your actions become quieter and more deliberate, more selective and more precise. You do not engage in battles that do not deserve your investment. You do not pursue validation from people whose opinion you do not need for your direction to hold. You do not overextend your energy across every possible demand for your attention. You choose with great care where to invest yourself. This selectivity creates a sharpness of presence that scattered energy never can. People notice when your attention is genuinely focused, when the words you use are few but carry real weight, when your silence feels chosen rather than accidental. This intentionality creates gravity in the room. People lean toward it, not because you are louder than everyone else, but because you are clearer than almost anyone they have encountered before. Becoming the person others want to follow also demands humility of a specific kind. Not humility performed for an audience to demonstrate admirable qualities, but grounded self-awareness that knows its own nature honestly. You know your genuine strengths with clarity. You acknowledge your actual limits without drama or defensive deflection. You take full responsibility for outcomes without collapsing into self-punishment or self-justification. This balance creates respect that mere competence cannot generate on its own. Arrogance pushes people away from the thing they might otherwise follow. Insecurity makes following exhausting for everyone. Grounded confidence, the kind rooted in genuine self-knowledge, attracts and holds people with a power that neither arrogance nor insecurity can access. It communicates something essential without any words being required. I know who I am. I know what I stand for. I am not threatened by challenge to either of those things. That message is quietly electrifying to people who have experienced the alternative. It frees those around you to show up with full honesty rather than protective calculation. To speak clearly about what they actually see rather than what they believe you want to hear. to take genuine responsibility for their own part, rather than managing around yours. Leadership multiplies at this level because you have stopped positioning yourself as the center of every decision and every solution. You have become the anchor instead, and anchors do not need to move constantly to serve their essential function. They hold. Holding creates the stability that allows everything connected to it to move freely. Stability is what makes real growth possible over time. This is how leadership actually scales into something larger than one person, not through increasing control, but through deepening the presence that people choose to align with. Presence also requires solitude that is protected and honored. Leaders who never sit quietly with themselves progressively lose their clarity as the noise of external demands fills every available space. They become reactive to the inputs that fill their days. They absorb too much of other people's noise and mistake it for their own thinking. Leaders with real depth protect time alone with the same intentionality they bring to their most important external commitments, not as escape from the demands of leadership, but as recalibration toward what actually matters within it. Solitude restores perspective that gets compressed by constant engagement. It sharpens the standards that gradual drift can soften. It quiets the internal clutter that accumulates and obscures clear direction. This inner work is invisible to the people around you, but its effects are unmistakable in everything you do. People feel when a leader is genuinely internally aligned. They feel it in the quality of decisions, in tone that stays consistent across contexts, in timing that reflects discernment rather than urgency. Timing becomes especially important as leadership matures. Leaders who rush everything signal an anxiety that undermines the authority they are trying to project. Leaders who wait signal a confidence in their own discernment that is genuinely compelling. Waiting intelligently is not inaction. It is discernment in practice. Knowing precisely when to move and when to hold still is one of the clearest hallmarks of mature and effective leadership. That discernment comes from a depth of self-knowledge that can only be built through honest, ongoing engagement with your own patterns and tendencies. You know your triggers with clarity. You know your patterns without flinching from what they reveal. You know your tendencies and where they reliably pull you off your best direction. And because you know them with that depth, they no longer control you from the shadows. This self-knowledge is not a burden to carry. It is freedom. It allows you to lead without being ambushed by impulse. It allows you to stay true to what matters when pressure is pushing you hard toward compromise. It allows you to act from the identity you have deliberately built, rather than from the reaction that would have arrived automatically. At this point, leadership becomes quiet strength that does not need to intimidate anyone to be felt. Not theatrical, not artificially dramatic, just solid through and through. People trust solid things in a way they cannot fully trust anything brittle or performed. They lean on solid things. They build around solid things. And eventually, naturally, they follow solid things. Not because they were instructed to. Not because they had no other viable choice. But because it simply makes the most sense available to them. This is the ultimate expression of leadership. Not dominance over other people. Not persuasion deployed strategically. Not authority maintained through the threat of force. But influence generated through the simple and demanding act of being. You become the example that others measure themselves against. The reference point that people return to when they need to remember what real leadership looks and feels like. The standard that justifies following even when following is difficult. And when that happens, leadership stops being something you have to consciously pursue. It becomes something others recognize in you quietly, naturally, and without any need for announcement. That is the complete meaning of becoming the person others want to follow. And once you genuinely arrive at that place, one truth becomes undeniably clear. Leadership was never really about controlling other people. It was always, from the very beginning, about mastering yourself until your presence spoke with a clarity and a weight that your words could never fully match on their own. Leadership was never meant to be loud. It was never meant to be dramatic. And it was never designed to begin anywhere other than inside you. It begins not with what you announce, but with what you actually tolerate in yourself. Not with what you demand from others, but with what you consistently practice when no one is watching. Not with how impressively you appear in public moments, but with how honestly you regulate yourself when the audience has gone home. Throughout this entire journey, one truth has surfaced again and again in different forms. Leadership is built from the inside out. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no substitutes. You learned that self-control is the first form of leadership because without it, nothing you build has a foundation capable of supporting real weight. That emotional mastery is not optional but essential because emotions will always rise inside you. But they do not need to be given the authority to decide on your behalf. That discipline outlasts motivation every single time because leadership cannot be made contingent on how you happen to feel on a given morning. That standards create authority because integrity exercised consistently generates more genuine power than any title ever bestowed. That clarity arrives before confidence because direction that is truly known stabilizes action in a way that performance never can. That responding is fundamentally stronger than reacting because restraint preserves the control that reaction perpetually surrenders. That consistency builds trust because repetition is what creates the credibility that converts potential into real followership. And finally, that leadership in its most complete form emerges when you become the person others naturally and freely want to follow. None of these principles require rare talent or exceptional circumstances. But every one of them is genuinely demanding. They ask you to stop outsourcing responsibility to your circumstances, to stop allowing emotion to serve as the explanation for your behavior, to stop waiting for confidence to appear before you begin acting. They ask you to lead yourself every single day, quietly, repeatedly, without applause or acknowledgement or the external validation that most people are secretly waiting for. This kind of leadership is not rewarded immediately. It does not generate standing ovations. It often goes entirely unnoticed in the short term. But over time, it compounds into something that cannot be faked or imitated. People begin to feel your steadiness from across the room. They sense your restraint in the moments that reveal what someone is actually made of. They trust your direction before you have even given it, because the pattern of your behavior has already told them everything they need to know. And that trust changes everything about what becomes possible. You stop needing to convince anyone of your capabilities. You stop needing to explain your decisions to people who have not yet demonstrated they have earned that explanation. You stop needing to grip outcomes with white-knuckled control because your presence does the essential work. Leadership becomes less effortful over time, not because you have stopped caring deeply about what matters, but because you are no longer spending half your energy fighting your own undisciplined impulses. You are aligned, and alignment is a kind of power that very few people have ever genuinely experienced. It allows you to move through real pressure without being consumed from the inside, to face conflict without adding fuel to it unnecessarily, to make critical decisions without the second guessing that drains leaders who have not yet built this foundation. It gives you the capacity to remain calm when everyone around you is rushing toward panic, clear when others are drowning in confusion, steady when others are fracturing under what they are facing. That is not exceptional talent. That is training applied consistently over time, and it is genuinely available to anyone who is willing to do the actual work. So here is the invitation that closes everything, not as motivation designed to produce a temporary emotional spike, as direction for the actual path forward. Lead yourself in the small moments, in how you pause before reacting when everything in you wants to fire immediately, in how you keep the promises you make to yourself when no external force is holding you to them, in how you uphold your standards when compromising them would be dramatically easier and no one would ever know, in how you choose clarity over the comfortable noise that keeps you distracted from what actually matters, in how you respond from genuine understanding instead of releasing pressure through reaction, in how you act consistently, especially and above all when absolutely nobody is checking. These moments may feel entirely insignificant as they happen. They are not. They are precisely where real leadership is forged, in the furnace of private choices made without any audience, without reward, without recognition. You do not need a title to begin this work. You do not need anyone's permission to start. You do not need an audience to make it real or meaningful. You need only the willingness to take full responsibility for your internal state and act from it with integrity. Because once you can genuinely lead yourself, everything around you begins to change. Your decisions carry more weight because they come from a clearer place. Your relationships stabilize because they are no longer absorbing the consequences of your unmanaged reactivity. Your influence deepens because it is rooted in something real that people can actually feel. And leadership stops being something you are exhausted from chasing. It becomes something others recognize in you without being told to look. Quietly, naturally, without force. So, remember this. Remember it especially when things feel uncertain and overwhelming. When the noise is at its loudest, and the pressure is at its heaviest, and the path forward is anything but clear. Before you lead a team, before you lead a family, before you lead a vision or a future that means everything to you, lead yourself first. Everything else, without exception, follows from there.